I'm thrilled to be back here again to introduce one of Michigan's great leaders, Mike Duggan, the mayor of Detroit. My company, S3, was founded in Detroit 35 years ago by Cindy Paskey, and since then we've grown the company across the United States. We have multiple offices in Europe. We have a thriving business in Buenos Aires, Argentina. We just celebrated our 3rd anniversary of a new cybersecurity center of excellence in Manila, Philippines. So, being from Detroit, we consider ourselves a homegrown, global Detroit success story, and we're very proud of that. Today, it's my honor again to introduce Mike Duggan, the mayor of Detroit, who's serving his 3rd term, and like I said last year, he's still the most popular mayor of Detroit ever. Having served so well and at such a high level for so long, there's a long list of achievements that would kind of be normal for me to read in an introduction of him, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to point out one fact that I think says a lot about what the mayor's achieved, and that is that more people are moving into the city of Detroit now than are moving out. And it's been a long time since it's been that way. I drove up here yesterday with a colleague of mine who's lived in the city of Detroit since the age of 2. This is her 30th Mackinac Policy Conference. She's heard a lot of mayors talk. She told me that since we were up here last time, in her neighborhood, which is not in the center of Detroit, the city of Detroit has built a new park, and she loves it. So to me, that's the mayor taking his vision, building the urban core, spreading the benefits out, in a very real way. Now, as you know, the mayor has just set his sights on higher office in the state of Michigan. And in all of our organizations and companies, I think we can recognize that when you have somebody who's so great at what they do in your organization, it's really hard to let them go, to let them move on to something new. But the final thing I'd like to say is when somebody is that great and they've set their sights on something new, we should all get behind them. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mike Duggan.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. All right. I'm glad to see people are still here today. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been here for about 30 years. And if the PowerPoint works, we're going to do even better. All right, looks like it's catching up. So I'm going to talk to you today about driving turnarounds, but I need to say thank you to the Chamber. I've been coming up here since the 1980s. I stood on this stage in the early 90s when I took over the smart bus system when it was near bankruptcy. We got to go in the right direction. We had to go for a millage. And it was the Greater Detroit Chamber that led that campaign that passed that millage. That's the reason SMART is still operating 30 years later. In 1999, I stood on this stage, and some of you were here when I was spending the summer doing $80 million of repairs to the Detroit school buildings filled with leaking roofs and broken windows and the like. And I asked for business volunteers to help oversee all the sites, and 100 businesses walked out of that hallway and signed up to help do that. And of course, I stood on this stage for DMC in the city of Detroit. And I'm going to talk to you today about one more turnaround. And I'm not talking about a turnaround from the current governor, who has had a great deal of success with her leadership. I'm talking about a turnaround on the political system of the state. I'm going to ask you the question today, is our very political system eroding Michigan's future? And you can see this and decide for yourself. But I've done one turnaround after another, and here's what I learned. You have to start with the right question. Why are things going the wrong way? Do you have bad people, or do you have a bad system? Because that choice decides your direction. And if you answer this question wrong, you have no hope. And I've been through this over and over. Edwards Deming said it in a way that I found out to be true. A bad system beats a good person every single time, and it does. And I learned this in 2003 when I went into the Detroit Medical Center. If you're not from Detroit, it's an 8-hospital, 11,000 employee system. It was a safety net system. It was on the verge of bankruptcy. They were down to 15 days cash on hand. The board voted to close several hospitals, fire the CEO. They hired bankruptcy attorneys, and I was minding my own business as the Wayne County prosecutor. And they came to me and said, we want you to take over a hospital system. And when it was announced, I had to look at this and say, what's at risk? I've watched in my lifetime as so many things were taken away from Detroiters. But receiving hospital treated 100,000 people a year, most of them either uninsured or on Medicaid. What were people going to do? Hutzel Hospital was delivering 5,000 babies a year, a quarter of the high-risk babies in southeastern Michigan. What were those moms going to do? And so I thought, I have to give this a try. But when you looked at this, the history of the losses was staggering. And it turned out, as I learned later, the board turned to me because everybody in the hospital industry turned them down. Right? Couldn't be saved, right? And when it was announced, a number of people were skeptical. What does the prosecutor do in running a hospital system? But I went in on the condition that the board hold off on closing the hospitals. I wasn't coming to close hospitals because I wanted to answer the question, what is wrong? And I went and I looked at the system. And here's what I found. I sat and I talked to the employees, and when you go into these situations, we had a management team of 25 people. I brought in about 3 with me, but there wasn't this long line of highly qualified hospital executives dying to come to Detroit to go to work for the bankrupt organization, right? I had to deal with the talent that was there, and I sat down with them one at a time. Doctors and nurses, and I'm sitting with them. These people are so smart, and they're so impressive, and finally I got to my first cabinet meeting, all 25 in the room, and I said, how did all you smart people lose $100 million a year every single year? And they explained it to me. They said, well, here's our management philosophy. We own 8 hospitals, and we were told that each of the 8 hospitals operates independently, and we have to produce a profit ourselves however we get there. And when 8 hospitals make a profit, we're all profitable. I said, what did you do? I said, well, we knew each other's doctors and patients best, so we all proceeded to steal patients and doctors from each other. And the system headed straight for bankruptcy. I said, that's insane. But I didn't think it was hopeless, because when I went in, what I found was every hospital I went to, the emergency room, had 3-hour backlog in it. I said, nobody's forcing you to make a 3-hour backlog. We're going to stop stealing patients from each other. I don't know anything about hospitals, but I know that people don't want to come to a hospital that's got a 3-hour wait in the emergency room. And so we engaged in a massive lean process. And I said to them, in 4 months, we are going to have the most efficient emergency room in the country. And at the time, there was a suburban hospital that had a 30-minute guarantee. And one of the doctors said to me sarcastically, what do you want, 29 minutes? I said, yeah, I want 29 minutes. The lean process started to be called jokingly 29-minute guarantee, and it caught on. But in those days, every place I went in the system, employees would come up to me and say, are you going to save my job? Are you going to save my job? They were all thinking they were going to be laid off, and I said, I can't save your job. The only people who can save your job are satisfied patients. You want to save your job, let's fix the system. 4 months later, we launched the 29-minute ER guarantee. And here's the interesting thing about changing a system. I learned in a hospital to fix the emergency room, it's not just the emergency room. You got to fix the whole hospital system, because you can speed up the registration, but if you get somebody in and they need an MRI or an X-ray, if your imaging operation isn't ready to take them, they can clog up that exam room for hours. If your radiologist doesn't read the imaging, you're backed up. If you need a diagnostic test and your lab isn't processing the test, you backed up that exam room for hours. If you're ready to put the patient in the hospital and move them up to a bed, but the people on the floors can't turn over the beds, you back up the exam room for hours. Everybody in the system had to engage in this. And I can tell you this for sure. You walk into a hospital with a backed up ER, you have a screwed up hospital. That's just the truth. So some of you are the healthcare business. You understand what I'm talking about. So we launched 4 months later the 29-minute ER guarantee. And it caught people's attention because we gave them, if we were doctor didn't see in 20 minutes, 2 tickets to a Tiger game. Now, that was 2004, and the Tigers lost nearly 100 games that year. Mike Ilitch gave me a great deal to get people the seats. But even the Washington Post covered the attention and talked about what we were doing. And all of a sudden, patients started to come back, and we shocked everybody in year one. But here's the thing I will always remember, the lesson that I learned about good people in a bad system is we'd have cabinet meetings, and you probably heard some of mine, they're pretty rough, but they start at 7:30, ended exactly at 8:30. There's an hour of metrics, and the 25 management team people would sit around, and around July, the CFO came in and said, of course, when the board hired me, they had adopted a budget to lose $100 million that year. I couldn't convince him to change it. And he said, we've been running $8 million a month ahead of budget. We're revising our projections. We're only going to lose $50 million this year. And then they started to go on to the next item. I said, wait a minute. I want you guys to think about this for a second. If this run rate continues for the next 6 months, we're going to make a profit this year. And the room fell into dead silence. I never saw so many confused faces. And a few people started to tear up. And I'm like, what's wrong with you guys? And one of them finally said, none of us has ever worked here when DMC made a profit. And they started to cry. I said, none of you? And they looked around the room. And the most distinguished and accomplished doctor in the entire system, who had tears coming out, 60 years old, said to me, it's hard to explain, but we've been losing for so long, we started to think of ourselves as losers. And for 1 minute, I felt a little bad about how tough I was being on him every week. But I got over it. And we started to take that attitude. And hospital by hospital, we turned things around. And after we finished, we took those 7 years of deficit, turned it into 9 straight years of profitability. That team of people who said they couldn't accomplish, and what is most remarkable, those years up there at $125 million, that was during the Great Recession. We were the only hospital system in southeastern Michigan that didn't lay anybody off because we were still growing. That same type of people that have been losing the money, when you put them into a good system, the talent flourished. And we grew to 14,000 employees, largest employer in the city of Detroit. Dan Gilbert wasn't yet there in full force. He passed us up a couple years later. But here's what I saw. While the DMC was booming, the city around us was going downhill. Half the streetlights were out. And if I go to the hospital cafeteria, a whole bunch of city employees would come and sit with me. And they would say, you need to run for mayor. I said, run for mayor? I live in Livonia. I said, no, you got to move. I said, okay. But the city's 83% black. And the employees say, you don't understand. If the rest of Detroiters got to know you like we do, they'll all vote for you. You can overcome the racial division. And I thought, this sounds crazy. But I kept watching. They closed down 20 recreation centers. They closed 250 city parks. And I'm thinking, am I going to sit by and not try? 200,000 Detroiters moved out, mostly African-American families with school-aged children. The city was hollowing out in front of my eyes. It wasn't going to do DMC any good to keep growing when everything around us was deteriorating. And so you looked at the historic population decline, it looked hopeless, right? But then I started to look at this. And you know what? In other cities in America, they weren't losing population. In 2011, 2012, a shift happened in this country. Young people started to want to come back to cities. Cities across America was booming. Even Cleveland was booming. I hope I didn't offend anybody. And then I started to think, if the other cities are growing and we're declining, maybe the problem isn't with Detroit. Maybe the problem is with the system. And all I had to do was look, because Detroit's political system was nonstop conflict. They fought with each other. They fought with Lansing. They fought with the suburbs. And here's what I learned. I watched these elections and said, how do these guys keep getting reelected when the city is declining like this? And it was amazing, the performance at election time. The people who got elected were the ones that are the most highly skilled at explaining to you why it was somebody else's fault. It wasn't theirs. That's how you won. And I thought, as long as this is the political system in Detroit, where you're us versus them politics, black versus white, city versus suburbs, this city has no chance. And so I moved to Detroit, not quite as quick as I should have. Ended up having to run as a write-in, hadn't planned on that, against a very popular sheriff and a good friend of mine, Benny Napoleon, and everybody says, guy's got no chance. But I ran in a different way, because when I looked at this history of deficits, I'm thinking, this looks familiar to me. I live this. This is what SMART looked like before I went in. This is what a DMC looked like when I went in. I recognize a bad system. And so I decided I'm going to campaign by going into everybody's living room and just talk to them about why we have to give up the us versus them politics. And we talked about the abandoned houses, we talked about the parks, but mostly what I said is we have got to change the narrative. And if you vote for me, 250 times I said at the end of these meetings, I said, if you vote for me, it's the end of us versus them politics. That you have to buy into a city where it doesn't matter if you're black or brown or white. It doesn't matter if you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim. It doesn't matter if you're gay or straight. If you're voting for me, you're voting for a whole different political system. And everybody said, that'll never work. And an amazing thing happened. When the results came in, I carried 92% of the precincts in the city. People were ready to change the system. The politicians weren't, but the people in the neighborhoods, they just wanted their kid to ride the bike down the street without going past the drug house. They didn't want to hear about any of this us versus them stuff. So with the help of Governor Snyder, we exited bankruptcy less than a year after my election. But that was good that we got rid of the back debt, but we still have the city with the highest homicide rate, the highest poverty rate, and 47,000 abandoned houses. Bankruptcy wasn't going to solve our problems. We had to have an entirely different political system. And so I'm looking at the fact that we have 20% unemployment rate, and I have a lot of people with high school degrees who want to go to work. And there's only one answer for that. I had to bring manufacturing back to Detroit. There was no other way that we could deal with it. If people don't have a job, nothing else gets solved. And so when I talked about this, the experts said, never happen. You're never going to get large manufacturing plants in Detroit. But I looked at that and said, why not? We got vacant land. We got lots of people ready to work. We got the workforce. And I know how to do a lean process to give them the fastest damn permitting system anywhere in America. Why shouldn't we win? But of course, what were the businesses afraid of? The crazy political system. And here's the difference. I sat down with City Council and I said, here's our problem. If we don't change the system so that people feel confident investing, you and me together, Detroit has no future. Let's talk about what you need. And the council people said, okay, we understand that. We know we're going to take grief if we vote for these projects, but we don't want to give cash up front to businesses. I mean, we're just coming out of bankruptcy. We can't be giving away cash. But if somebody's going to build out of vacant land we're getting no taxes for and hire thousands of people, we'll give them a discount on the new taxes. We can all agree on that. And one thing, though, they've got to give preference to hiring Detroiters. We're not going to build all this and have people come in from out of town. And I said to the council people, each one 9 at a time, okay, I'm going to start landing these deals. You should scrutinize them and make sure they make these provisions. But if they do this, are you prepared to take the grief and vote for them? And I will, to my last day, give City Council credit because they're the ones in those meetings who are taking the grief. But here's what we did. We said to everybody here, we'll make our land available. We won't give you the cash up front. We will give you the discounts. You are going to have the easiest permitting process anywhere in America, and we will send you a workforce, and you got to interview our folks first. If you do that, come here. If you don't, don't. Very simple. Don't waste your time. And so took the land, marketed it, and sure enough, Shad Khan and Flexengate comes in and builds the first new auto plant in 20 years. All right? And as soon as he did it, the national media dismissed it as rare. Nobody thought another one was really coming. But an interesting thing happened. When he opened it and went to hire 500 people, 16,000 applicants showed up. And every manufacturing company in the Midwest said, whoa, we're having trouble filling positions where we are. We have an opportunity here. And we went one after another. Lear demolished the 40-year-old abandoned plant. This is what we've been looking at for 40 years, and built a new Lear plant, hired 700 people. And the Kettering High School site became a 600-employee dashboard plant. And when Jeep went to site a 5,000-employee plant, we competed against all the states in the South, South Carolina and Georgia, all these ones have been winning them. We won it, we beat them out, and they hired 4,000 Detroiters, moved 4,000 families to the middle class in one shot. This is what happens when you change a system. Nobody could believe they're coming back. And I give council credit because they scrutinized every one, but every time the companies followed the 4 principles, they got prompt approval. And we kept going. The State Fair had been closed since 2011. We built out a whole park, including Amazon, employing 2,400 people. The new Huntington Bank headquarters came downtown. Ford did the unthinkable and saved the train station, just moved in 1,000 workers. The Henry Ford is building $2 billion, under construction today. Dan Gilbert is opening this building, and GM is moving this fall into the new headquarters, and he's very soon going to open the second tallest building in the state of Michigan. All right? When you take good people out of a bad system, turnarounds happen a lot faster than you expect. And so this is 10 years ago. The New York Times declared Detroit the world capital of staring at abandoned old buildings. Okay, of all the world capitals I wanted to be, a capital of staring at abandoned buildings wasn't one of them. Right? How fast can a turnaround occur? 10 years later, $10 billion in projects either already built or under construction. We had record reductions in unemployment rate. People in Detroit are back to work. Neighborhoods are coming back. And this is what a turnaround looked like. 11 straight years of deficits turned into 11 straight years of surpluses. When you unify the mayor and the council in a coherent policy and we don't change it, we tell people, here's what we're going to do. You can accomplish an amazing amount in a short period of time. Oh yeah, and that 65-year population decline? I bet you never thought you'd see this. Detroit leading the state of Michigan in population growth. We're driving Michigan's population recovery. And so when I started thinking about what's next, I just talked about my own personal life. I had 2 kids move out of state on me. And for all of us, watching our children leaving Michigan is a very difficult thing to see. But we haven't built the economy with the jobs that have the opportunities here that we want. The economy's gone the right direction in general. These have been pretty good years. But we're not creating the kind of jobs that the young people want. They're leaving us far too often for California, for Miami, for Chicago, and the like. And so this isn't something that happened in the last few years. Since 1990, second worst in the United States, and we're projected to lose 700,000 more by the year 2050. And the interesting thing is that projection doesn't come from some negative person. That's actually the state of Michigan's own demographer who says we're on track to lose 700,000 more. And I look at this and I say, I recognize a trend line that goes like that. This has been my life, right? And so, more troubling news. 60% of Michigan's 4th graders are not reading at grade level. 44th in America in 8-year-olds reading. And then again, I look at the trend line. Looks familiar to me. This isn't something that happened the last few years. This has been going on since 1998. Our reading levels for our 8-year-olds have dropped from 1998 to today more than 25 years. And so I'm looking at this as I'm deciding what to do in life. And I know that I'm a little perverse, but those 2 lines called out to me and said, this is what you do. Long-term turnarounds. Michigan looks fine today, but if we keep going down these lines where our kids aren't learning in school and our young people aren't staying, what's our long-term prospect? And is this something you can make people understand at a time when the state's not in crisis the way that Detroit was in crisis? Can people understand? I'm not sure, but I thought, I got to try and explain this to people. And so said, okay, what is the problem? Are our students and teachers and principals that much worse than the rest of America? Or are they trapped in a bad system? Are our economic folks that much worse than the rest of America? Or are they trapped in a bad system? Because if they're just that worse, I don't need to run for governor. But what if they're trapped in a bad system? And then I looked at Lansing, and I said, this looks familiar. This us versus them toxic relationship in Lansing, I've been dealing with Lansing a long time. It is the worst I have ever seen. Lansing is absolutely obsessed with Republicans versus Democrats. Who is in charge? Do I have the majority? Can I get the majority? If I hear the word trifecta one more time, everybody's obsessed with, I'm going to win the trifecta the next time. And when they get the trifecta, it all falls apart. They can't pass anything anyway because they're so evenly divided and fighting with each other. I said, okay, I wonder if this is the issue. But we've been talking about partisan politics for years. Everybody says, it's Republicans and Democrats, they can't get along. I said, but objectively, are we worse than the rest of the country? And last October, I was in Boston for a couple days, the TV out of the hotel room, and I didn't know what, someone was bothering me. Ad came on for Burger King. Then an ad came on for a car dealership. Then an ad came on for a hair care product. And I looked up and I said, this is really weird. In Michigan, I don't see any of these ads anymore. Remember October last year? It was political attack ads morning till night. I said, I miss the car dealer ads. And then I realized this wasn't happening every place in America. There were actually only 7 states that they were pouring all of this money into, these toxic ads. And of course, in Michigan, we had a lot of competitive seats. And so look at this nationally. The top chart is national spending, Republicans and Democrats in 2020 to 2024, actually dropped slightly. But in Michigan, the political ad spending went from $400 million in the 2020 presidential to $800 million. Because it wasn't just Trump and Biden, it was the U.S. Senate race. It was Slotkin and Rogers. It were the congressional races with Barrett and with James and with McDonald-Rivet. And it was all of the state rep races. It was nonstop. And I thought, we have created in this state, you don't realize it, but it's seeping into your head all day long, a more toxic environment than they have in almost anywhere else in America. And then you got to do this. I don't have any way to do this except be candid with you. These were the ads we were listening to. So out in the Lansing area, Tom Barrett, the Democrats ran an ad against him saying he wrote the bill that put women and doctors in jail and put somebody out there that says, don't vote for somebody who will let you die. And I think, that's pretty awful. I'm sure Barrett's going to come back with a positive ad talking about what he does good for people, right? No. He was running against Curtis Hertel. So his ad said, Curtis Hertel is a corrupt lobbyist working for the Chinese Communist Party. And that wasn't enough, so he did a second one, and this time he put Chinese words in front of it to make sure you couldn't miss the point. Okay? And Barrett won with 50.3% of the vote by attacking the Chinese communists. And this ran day and night. And then down in our area, the Republicans and the Democrats. Democrats ran an ad on John James, talked about his position that he'd taken once on abortion, on no exceptions, and they said, John James is insane. That's the ad that the Democrats ran on John James. And of course, John James, serving his first term in Congress, he's going to come back with an ad. Let me show you what I've accomplished as your congressman in my first 2 years in Washington, right? Nope. Republicans came back, and they said Carl Marlinga, his opponent, is one of the most prominent defense attorneys in Macomb County. He's defended all kinds of people. That's his role. Let's blame Carl Marlinga for his client's actions. And so they ran this ad, defeat pedophile protector Carl Marlinga. They ran an ad day and night saying defeat the pedophile protector, and John James won with 51% of the vote. And you say, what are we doing when you go home and say 51% of the people decided I'm not a pedophile protector? I mean, is that really what we're doing in this country? But now the election's over, right? That was only for a couple of months. The toxic partisanship is over, right? Michigan isn't going to be toxic all year round. And then I got a chance to see for myself, because now I'm an independent. Now the Democrats are mad at me. And in April, I stand up with the Republican Speaker, Matt Hall, with a whole bunch of Democratic and Republican police and legislators to pass a bill to put cops on the street in all the cities. And we actually got this bill through the House by a vote of 104 to 4. It was good cooperation. That was April 7th. The next day, April 8th, Curtis Hertel attacks me for standing up with John James. And here's what he says: MAGA Matt's in lockstep with the Trump-Musk agenda. Duggan is out of touch standing up with him. Now, apparently Curtis is no longer working for the Chinese. So he's attacking me. Now, that's April 8th. But to prove that God does indeed have a sense of humor. The very next day, April 9th, another Democrat stood up next to Matt Hall that I was terrible out of touch for doing. Somebody you recognize, Gretchen Whitmer. Now Curtis Patel doesn't know what to do, but the only thing that's worse is where she stood up with Matt Hall. Because the Democrats are unified on two things. They hate Republicans in general, and they hate Donald Trump in particular. You can guarantee that they've argued about everything else, but those two things they agree on, but they were in the Oval Office. And Gretchen Whitmer is a smarter politician as I've ever known. Why is she going to the Oval Office? She knows the grief she's going to get by going there. She walked in there knowing full well the grief she's going to get. You know why she did it? Selfridge Air Force Base. 5,000 jobs at stake in Macomb County. Right? $850 million impact. Mark Hackle has been fighting, Candace Miller has been fighting this for years. But the old A-10 fighter jets are being phased out. Selfridge was in trouble. And twice under the Democratic administration, Selfridge got passed over for the new mission. And it looked like it was in trouble. And Governor Whitmer says, I got an idea. I'm going to try to pitch Donald Trump. And so, surely, I understand the technique, surely the Democrats are not going to attack their own governor, right? The very next day, first tweet, Dana Nessel. She says, why I refuse to normalize this president, appeasement is not a workable strategy with a fascist. She calls her own governor, her running mate, her partner, appeasing a fascist. I said, is this how far we have gone? But of course, Dana Nessel wasn't long. All across America, they beat up the governor, Democratic malpractice, cozying up to Trump. She didn't care. And 3 weeks later, on Trump's 100th day in office, what happened? She shows up. He announces Selfridge is getting the mission. The governor stands up, and Donald Trump gives Gretchen Whitmer credit for saving Selfridge Air Force Base. And so you say now, okay, the Democrats are going to leave her alone, right? So that afternoon, as this is announced on Trump's 100th day, Dana Nessel's not going to attack her again, right? Nope. Jocelyn Benson did. And Jocelyn Benson tweets, the day Gretchen Whitmer's announcing this, 100 days of reckless economic policies, that isn't something to celebrate, especially not in Michigan. The governor's other partner said it is more important to fight Trump than to land 5,000 jobs in this state. And she wasn't alone. All across America again, they bashed Gretchen Whitmer for bringing jobs to Michigan. And I think, how did we get here? To the point where fighting for our state is not as important as being angry with the other party. And so I tell you all this to say, I look at this and say, this doesn't have anything to do with our reading scores failing, right? Or am I just complaining about partisan issues? Well, we were 19th in the country. Jennifer Granholm's first number, we were 27th. Snyder's first year, we were 35th. Whitmer's first year, we were 38th. And we keep dropping. I've worked closely with all three of those governors, three of the smartest people I've ever met, hardest working people I've ever met, and yet it kept going down. And I thought to myself, is the problem with the three of them, or is there a problem with the system? And if it's a problem with the system, I better know, because I don't need to be in a system, right, that can't succeed. And so, is it the partisan turmoil? And this is what I'm going to tell you. Our problem has not been with our elected officials. Our problem has been with the structure. So in 2010, 2011, the schools in Michigan were all graded A to F. And then in 2014, the legislature repealed A to F. Every time Republicans and Democrats flipped, they changed the rules. In 2012, we said, we got a new one. We're going to grade every school in the state, top to bottom. Then in 2016, they changed that and they repealed top to bottom. Then in 2015, we said we're going to color. We're going to grade every school green, yellow, and red. But then in 2017, they repealed the color standing. I'm not making this up. 2019, they said, we're readopting A to F. But that's okay. 2023, they repealed A to F. 2021, they said, we're going to retain third graders who can't read at grade level. That's okay. 2023, they repealed the third grade standard. You are a teacher in a classroom. You are a principal or a superintendent. How do you operate in this system? Because the problem is, with this closely divided legislature, this stuff keeps changing back and forth. There's no central vision that says, here's what we're going to do for the kids. It's, what can I do to pass a bill that will give me a partisan advantage in the next election? And so this chaos became a national embarrassment. And here's the worst part. That isn't even the worst part. They kept changing all this stuff, but even when they graded them, there was no accountability. I have been spending days with superintendents and principals, and I said, for all these A to F grades, the red, green, yellow grades, the top to bottom grades, was there ever a time that a principal or a superintendent got fired because of their poor assessments? Nobody can remember one. They're scrambling around changing textbooks and curriculums, but it didn't matter because the poor performing leaders weren't held accountable anyway. The legislators didn't care about that. The talking points were about passing the new standards. Do we have good people trapped in a bad system? And so the other talking point was charters. Charters were going to solve the problem because these kids are trapped in these schools. They don't have a choice. We had 150 charters in 1999. They repealed the cap in 2011, went to 300. Now we have 368 charters. But the overall reading level hasn't improved because here's what happens. And I actually believe in choice. I believe charter school options. We have very high-performing charters in Detroit. We have some really bad charters in Detroit. We have very high-performing traditionals in Detroit and some very bad traditionals in Detroit. And it turns out when you look on average, their scores almost exactly the same because you can put in a different structure, but if you put them in the same system where they're changing the standards every 2 years and nobody's holding anybody accountable, it doesn't matter what your school structure is. Your system's screwed up. And if you don't think this is a crisis, did you see what just happened on May 6th? School bond issues pass across America, no problem, 75%. Pass at 75% in Michigan, but they've been declining. But for the first time ever on May 6th, the majority of school bond issues in the state of Michigan, the voters voted down. And they voted them down all across the state. The people of Michigan are losing confidence in what's happening in the schools. Tell me we're not eroding our future. And so, okay, maybe they didn't see it coming. The decline's predictable, right? This is Ed Trust Midwest, great policy group. 10 years ago this month, May 19th, you know what they wrote? If we stay our course, we're going to be 44th in fourth grade level by 2030. Okay, it turned out they got it in 2025. But this was something everybody saw coming. You could see what was happening, and instead of addressing it, they keep passing these damn bills in Lansing that give them something to talk about, don't change anything. And so I look to the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu and says, if you don't change direction, you may end up where you're heading, right? And for the last 10 years, we kept walking in the direction we were heading. And is it changing today? Well, here's what happened last month. The House Republicans voted to drop Algebra 2 from the required high school curriculum. Straight line vote in the Michigan House. Now, the interesting thing is there's actually merit to this, and I'll show you why in a minute. But how did we get to a system where the legislature is voting class by class on a partisan basis what to do? The problem is with the system. And I actually think, as I'll show you, this is something that needs to be done, but it can't be done by legislators acting one bill at a time. But you had actually good-meaning Republicans who were trapped in a system. This is the only way they knew what to do. So, okay, same thing I look at. Maybe it's problems everywhere. Other states having this problem, well, let's look around us. Indiana, in the last 10 years, have gone in fourth grade reading from 14th to 6th. Mississippi's been remarkable, 49th to 9th. Ohio, 19th to 14th. Louisiana's gone from 47th to 15th. Idaho's gone from 32 to 19th. This is not happening everywhere. This is happening in a system that is designed to fail, and nobody's doing anything about it. But when you look at these states, what they have in common, some of them are doing science and reading, some of them do orthotics, but you know what they all have in common? They all have consistent long-term plans that don't change from year, and they let the teachers teach and the students learn under the same program. So then, here's my question. Can a politically divided state like ours ever have a long-term policy? There's only two ways to get there. You either win a majority in the election, or you build a majority across the lines based on policy consensus. So let me ask you guys here, let's be honest. How many of you in the last few years have made a donation, either a Republican or Democratic candidate, for the state legislature? Okay? Quite a few of you, right? You all did it with the right thing. But to make a difference, you got to have a trifecta. You got to get the governor and the Senate and the House. It's happened in 2016 for the Republicans, 2022. But it's so evenly divided that in Las Vegas, what you did with your money, putting money down in a 50-50 race, they have a game called roulette. And I'm not kidding about this. You put your ball down or your chips down on red or black, you got a 50-50 chance of winning. And it comes up red, I'm great. Then you stick it on red again, that's great. You keep sticking it out, eventually you're going to lose. But what do we do in this state? We go at a 50-50 choice and think it's going to have lasting impact. And if you think I'm exaggerating, look at this. In 2022, folks in this room put up $90 million on partisan campaigns for the legislature. The Democrats won 2018 in the Senate by 400 votes. They won 56-54 majority in the House by a few hundred votes. 2,000 votes out of 4.4 million gave the Democrats their trifecta. All right. 2024, no Senate race. You put $100 million in the House race. They won 58-52. The Democrats lost their trifecta by 3,000 votes out of 5.4 million. If you are trying to change the system by putting money into outvoting the other guy year after year in Michigan, you are spinning the wheel. That's all you're doing. How are the kids in our classrooms ever going to have consistency if this is our approach? Do you see what I'm saying about the system? And so I've been talking about schools. I could talk about a lot of things, but I'm going to deviate for 1 minute. You all know what's happened on our economic development policies, right? We have not been attracting young folks. But what have we done? From 2000 to 2007, we had some level of what were called mega credits, basically cash grants. And then we hit the Great Recession. And the state gave out $7 billion in credits, mostly to keep manufacturing here. And Rick Snyder came in and said, that's crazy. He stopped the credits. He stopped the film credits. Film industry left town, right? But he said, we're not giving this away. Then by 2017, he said, okay, we went too far. Passed something called transformational brownfield, which is basically the Detroit strategy. It says no money up front, but we'll discount if you build new. But there was a limit to it. Then in 2021, Ford puts battery plants in Texas and Kentucky, and everybody gets concerned, and we pass SOAR, and we give out huge amounts of cash up front. And now Matt Hall and the Republicans come in and say, cash up front doesn't make any sense, and SOAR is canceled. And by the way, we've hit the cap on brownfield, and we now are unilaterally disarmed. Tell me, as a business owner, that if you are in a place where it changes every couple of years, do you see why we're having trouble building the economy of the future? Do you want to win the majority of the ballot? Or could you build a majority among good people of goodwill on the Republican and Democratic side and have it last? And so we're never going to get these job opportunities if we don't unify. So I'm looking at this and say, okay, I see what's happening. There's only two choices, Republicans and Democrats, right? Except Gallup every year asks people across the country, do you consider yourself a Democrat, a Republican, or independent? And last year, 27% Democrat, all-time low. 27% Republican, all-time low. 43% think of themselves as independent. And I think, maybe we could change the system. Maybe we don't have to keep doing this. And so, could Michigan voters decide that? The Chamber ran a poll, said 63% when they said, do you agree with the following statement? We should elect an independent governor not affiliated with either party. They will be forced to work with both sides to get things done. 63% agree. Is there an opportunity to change the system? And that's the question that I'm asking. So let me talk to you for a minute about how it would go for schools. Because you can't possibly do it, right? You can't get these folks together. But in Detroit, we actually did it. In 2017, there was a group of folks who came together and they said, look, we got 130,000 school-aged children. We have 100 DPS traditional schools, 100 charter schools, and the lowest third grade reading in the United States. Parents are overwhelmed. They got 200 choices. They have no idea which school is good or bad. We need to pull them together and have a document that informs parents. And we all vote that the mayor should do it. And they did. They said, mayor should bring in the charters and the traditionals and the teachers union and get them all to agree to a standard that we'll pass out. They said, yeah, right. Everybody knows teachers don't want accountability, right? Charters don't want accountability. The principals don't want accountability. And they want me to put it in a book that we pass out to everybody. And so, you think you get them to come together? I sat with each of them. And here's the interesting thing. when you get away from the politicians, they actually want to teach children. And they came together, Dr. Vitti, the charters, and David Hecker, and the president of the Michigan Teachers said, we're all coming in. And they did in 6 months what the legislature hadn't been able to do in 10 years. They all agreed to a single A, B, C, D, F score that would apply to every single one of them. The law didn't require it. They voluntarily signed up for accountability, and I'll show you why. They used the Denver model, and what Denver does is instead of just looking at the test scores, they look at your improvement. That is, if you take kids at the 5% level and get them to the 13% level, you are doing a hell of a job teaching, right? You should be graded for that. And so they weight 50% improvement. And so why it matters is, if you get a school that starts at year 1 at 5% proficiency, and year 2 you go to 12%, and year 3 you go to 18%, you are a hell of an educator. Under a traditional system, you'd get an F because you were below 20%. But because we rate improvement, you would get a B, because you should get a B. You're doing the right thing and scoring the right way. But if you're in a school that starts at 18 and you go down to 15, now you're losing on proficiency and improvement, you get an F. And David Hecker, the president of Teachers Union, looked at this and he said, I don't want to be accountable for how far behind our kids are when they start school in Detroit. I want to be accountable for how fast we teach them. You sign me up for improving the kids' education, and we'll do it. And so the next year, we created the book. We did the unthinkable. The Detroit Parents Guide to Schools. All 200 traditional and charter schools are in here, and we featured their language programs and their arts programs, every single thing. In year 1, it was the book. Year 2, they were going to get the A to F. And we put these things in barbershops and hair salons and coffee shops and on the internet all over the city. People were like, oh my God, I can see my choices. Parents could make informed decisions. I went then and said, all right. And all of the schools were saying, I'm measured on improvement. They're working like mad to improve the scores. And year 2, we're going to press. 2019, I'm waiting for the grades. The grades are up at the State Board of Education. Can't be a problem. They can measure scores, right? And we're waiting. State Superintendent Office doesn't send it. And then I go up to see the superintendent, this guy Rice. And he says, you don't understand. We're in a toxic fight over A to F up here in Lansing. The Democrats on the Board of Ed don't want it. The Republicans in the legislature do. And I said, I don't care about your fight. This is a parent's guide, for Christ's sake. We're just passing this out so our parents can make an informed decision. And he said, if you succeed on this, you're going to help them in their effort to grade the rest of the people. And the state superintendent, I showed in this book, I said, don't you think this is great? Wouldn't give us this because he didn't want anybody passing out something with accountability. And it was the first day, literally in my life, I thought I need to be governor. So how do we turn this around? Here's what I do. We need $4.5 billion over 5 years. And we can get there right now. Revenue growth should produce about $600 million a year. We're going to have to cut 2% for the rest of the budget each year for 5 years. This is what I do. If this is our priority, we can do it. But we can put $4.5 million in. But $4.5 million without accountability does nothing. And this is what I'm going to be proposing. First thing, we create a Marshall Plan for reading. We've seen from these other states what it's done, and the state's taken some good steps. They've added the science of reading and dyslexia. I don't want to make it sound like they haven't done anything, because the legislature has. But we'll have a group that will do all of the things. I've spent lots of time with superintendents with small group learning and literacy. We'll put the money into that Marshall Plan. Second, we are going to rebuild Michigan's decimated high school CTE program. And if you want to write a book on how a bad system kills the aspirations of Michigan residents, we did it here. We passed something in 2006 that went into effect in 2011 called the Merit Curriculum, where we mandated more classes in science, language, than any place else. Sounded great, right? We were going to have the best prepared kids for college, and we put it in effect. But here was the problem. The way the schools were set up, you spent a half a day at your base school and a half a day at your CTE program for electrical work or HVAC or anything else. When they put all these mandates in, you didn't have time to go to the other school, right? People know this, right? And so 41% of our school districts are now CTE deserts. You know what radical said 41% are CTE deserts? The State Board of Education this year, the people in charge of the schools, everybody knows this. But we saw this happen because when they did it and these schools cut back, you had, interestingly, a handful of districts that thought it was so important that they actually passed local millages and they built CTE centers and they squeezed them in at a third of a day. And then they said to the other schools in the surrounding districts, we'll take your kids, but you got to give us half of your foundation grant every time the kid comes into your school. And the guidance counselors at those other schools, oddly enough, didn't encourage people to leave and cut the base budget. And then they have another rule that maybe you've got programs offered at a community college or college. And so dual enrollment, right? In the rest of America, dual enrollment's a big thing. You know what the law in Michigan says? If your high school student dual enrolls at a college, the tuition comes out of the high school's budget. We did this to ourselves. Again, the guidance counselor said, you don't really need that dual enrollment thing, right? You're cutting into teachers here. We designed a system that nobody has fixed. And so what I want to do is I want to double the CTE funding, okay? Jeff Donofrio sitting over here somewhere did a report. We need 47,000 positions in skilled trades by 2021, 2028. Everybody here knows this. Why are we not, as a state, saying we're going to fix it? And yet, if you look at what's happening around the country, Indiana, $168 million, Pennsylvania, $105 million, Michigan's only at $40 million. We don't have skilled trades because our people aren't talented enough. We have no skilled trades because our system is keeping them away from good life choices. Do you see what's bothering me? All right? And then, if you want to actually get guidance about your career choices, we have said to you basically, you're going to college, God bless you, we're behind you. You want to do anything else? The average school in America has one counselor for 250. Michigan, 1 for 600, second lowest. You have nobody there. And so when you go to the outstate areas of the state, as I'm doing every day, and these kids in their 20s and 30s, they are so angry about their high school experience, and Democrats say, why do the people with high school degrees not like Democrats anymore? I said, look at what you've done. Go talk to these folks. You've taken away career options for anybody who hasn't decided college is their only choice. The problem is with the system. And so we need to build an educator-driven plan, and we're going to have the superintendents write it just like we did here. It might not be the same way Detroit was, but we need to have a grading system. And then, this is the part that's going to piss people off, but this is what I believe. There's got to be consequences. If we're going to put $4.5 billion more into our schools, the people running the schools need to have some skin in the game. And so here's what I'd say. First year at your school, if you're failing, you give us an improvement plan. We'll give you help. Year 2, if you're failing, you as a principal are on last chance. I will give you more help. But in the 3rd year, you're still failing, the principal and your team, you're fired, okay? If you were in business and your business decline 3 years in a row, you either get rid of the leader or you go out of business. Only in public education can the principal fail year after year and you send the next group of kids. I know it sounds harsh, but if you're going to put $4.5 billion in, let's hold them accountable. And in year 4, when they change, if they don't fix it, in year 5, fire the superintendent. Okay? Let's hold the people accountable for doing this. Now, it is very simple. Are we protecting the 6 and 7 and 8 and 9-year-olds studying for the future, or are we protecting the adults in the system? And so here's the thing that I really like you to think about. There's 2 ways I could get here. I could try to win trifectas, or I could try to build solution. So here's the principles. I want to increase the school budget without raising taxes. I want to fund early rating. I want to rebuild the CTE program. And I want to hold principals and superintendents accountable. Now look at that list and tell me, which thing would Republicans or Democrats disagree with? There's nothing partisan about this. This is something both sides could agree on. And this is what I want to do. I don't want to spin the roulette table and try to win 8 straight or 4 straight trifectas. I want to build a consensus in the state that this is what our education system looks like, so it doesn't matter if a Republican or Democrat wins the next time, because we've all committed to what our education program is going to be for our kids. And so my thing is this, and I've learned it over and over. A bad system beats a good person every time. And so how bad is the system? And I didn't wake up one morning and say, gee, I'm going to run as an independent. It sounds like a good idea, an easy way to get elected. But here is an ad against Kristen McDonald-Rivet, the congresswoman up in Flint and Saginaw. This isn't last October, this is today. The attack ad on Kristen McDonald-Rivet is running night and day in Flint and Saginaw for the November 2026 election. The Republicans don't have a candidate. They have no idea who their candidate is. But they know if there's only two choices, that we know the pedophile protector ads work. If we just make the Democrat terrible, we can win. We are not going to be living in a state where you only have these ads 2 or 3 months a year. We're heading to a state where 12 months a year, year in and year out, we're going to have toxic ads. And I thought, well, what if I come along and there's a third choice? You can't just kill one party and you automatically win. With a third choice, you have to actually say what you're for. And so I thought, can I change the system and force people out of hateful, toxic ads and into a debate? And so I stood on this stage in 2014. My first Mackinac conference, we were in bankruptcy. And with the help of City Council and a lot of you, I'm standing here today as the mayor of one of the most exciting cities in America. And I said to you when I stood here 10 years ago, Detroit's turnaround is not as far away as it appears. And I will say this to you, Michigan's turnaround is not as far away as it appears, but we have got to change the political system. Thank you very much for your support, and have a great night. All right.